The Iranian terrorist general would still be dead under a Senate resolution on the use of force. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about the U.S. targeting of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. He's basically a legitimate military target under outstanding authorizations to use force in Iraq. He may be a general in the Iranian military, or was a general in the Iranian military before he was blown to pieces by U.S. Predator drones. But under a resolution offered by U.S. Senator Tim Kaine, supposedly that seems to appear to want to protect Iran from any other attacks. I think that this use of force by President Donald Trump would have still been legitimate and authorized. I think that this is merely a show resolution. It wouldn't actually change the outstanding authorization to use force in Iraq against terrorist targets, including those that are supported by Iran. There's nothing that shields Iran from basically being targeted by the authorizations in Iraq if they're waging war in Iraq, which Soleimani was definitely doing. And so Kaine is trying to propose to limit the use of force, but in reality, he is, and those who are supporting his resolution are simply accepting the status quo of U.S. forces in Iraq and the Middle East. Now, the resolution it's a Senate joint resolution to direct the removal of U.S. armed forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran that have not been authorized by Congress. But the thing with the 2002 authorization to use force is that it's geographically limited. So if you're waging war against U.S. forces in Iraq, against Iraqi forces in Iraq, you're subject to being targeted by the U.S. military. And there's not going to be any piece of paper that Congress votes on that's going to protect the terrorists in Iraq. And this has certainly been true since 2002. But the resolution that Kaine is proposing, it states, quote, directs the president to remove United States armed forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran or any part of its government or military unless explicitly authorized by a declaration of war or specific authorization for use of military force. So, except as otherwise authorized to use force by Congress, the president cannot engage in hostilities with Iran, which means, given the outstanding authorizations to use force against Iraq and against terrorists, the drone strike in Iraq by U.S. forces against Soleimani would have been most certainly authorized as a legitimate military target, and he would still be dead even if the Kaine resolution had been in place, specifically under the broad authority under the joint resolution in 2002. Quote, the president is authorized to use the armed forces of the United States as he determines to be necessary and appropriate in order to defend the national security of the United States against the continuing threat posed by Iraq, and to enforce all relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions regarding Iraq. So that authorized the overthrow of the Saddam Hussein government in 2003 and the use of force after Hussein was removed from power to restore stability to the country. Now, the resolution, allows the use of force to enforce UN Security Council resolutions, including UN Security Council Resolution 1483. And it stated, quote, calls upon the authority, that's referring to the coalition forces against Iraq, consistent with the Charter of the United Nations and other relevant international law, to promote the welfare of the Iraqi people through the effective administration of the territory, including in particular working towards the restoration of conditions of security and stability and the creation of conditions in which the Iraqi people can freely determine their own political future. So in order to have targeted Soleimani in Iraq under the aforementioned provisions, all President Trump had to determine was that the use of force was necessary to protect U.S. national security, to promote the welfare of the Iraqi people, to restore security and stability in Iraq. And I think that, targeting a terrorist general who is waging war in Iraq basically qualifies. That makes Soleimani a legitimate target. He's said to have been responsible for waging war against the U.S. and Iraqi forces, including arming Shia militias in Iraq, and the placement of roadside bombs that have maimed and wounded and killed thousands in Iraq over the past 2 decades. And the recent occupation by Shia militia of the U.S. Embassy, that basically justifies taking an action against the Soleimani network, if that's what the intelligence was showing. So if that qualifies him as a military target in Iraq. The 2002 authorization, it covered the targeting of foreign fighters. It didn't have to just merely be Iraqi Saddam Hussein forces. The same authorization was used to target al-Zarqawi, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and he was a bad terrorist, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that we were fighting for several years. Now, as for how strong the evidence against Soleimani is he as bad as Zarqawi? It doesn't matter. This is not evidence for a court case. This has to do with the intelligence gathered by the president and his intelligence services, and making a determination about the use of military force consistent with statutory authority to use force in Iraq to secure Iraq. And if that's what the president determined was necessary, we got to take out this Iranian terrorist network and we're going to take out their top general in order to secure Iraq, the president is legally authorized under Congress's provision. So Congress complaining about the use of force in Iraq when they've never rescinded the 2002 authorization to use force in Iraq, well, that's their problem. If they want to restore some semblance of Article 1, then don't have outstanding authorizations to use military force that last for 2 decades if you want U.S. forces not to be so engaged overseas. I think that's basically a political question. Congress can ask that question, and the resolution offered by Kaine would do nothing about the 2002 authorization. Therefore, Soleimani would still be dead under the resolution. To meet the legal standard, which is what the Senate is arguing over here, the president had to have acted as a determination to protect U.S. national security and to secure Iraq. He makes the determination under the law. It's a political question for him as well. When Soleimani freely traveled to Iraq, having waged war there for years against U.S. and Iraqi forces, he was painting himself as a target, basically. Americans for Limited Government President Rick Mann noted in a statement, quote, "The president's decision to target the terrorist General Soleimani is authorized under current law and will remain so authorized even under the resolution being proposed by Senator Tim Kaine, which allows for force otherwise authorized by Congress, including the 2002 resolution." Now, if Congress wanted to address the fact that the authorizations to use force in Iraq and Afghanistan are nearly 20 years old, without any end in sight, I think that's a legitimate debate to be had. President Trump should invite that debate. The American people should invite that debate, because after 2 decades, what are we still doing in Iraq and Afghanistan? What are our objectives? What is our strategy? I think that whoever's going to be president in 2021, they need to have good answers to those questions. And so we look forward to that debate. And I think we should be looking at the authorizations and see if there's still U.S. interest at stake. To remain in these countries indefinitely, militarily, engaging in operations against enemy combatants. If we're not there to fight a war, then I don't know what we have an authorization to use military force for. But that's the question Congress and the president should be asking and answering. We also need to determine if it is finally time to leave the Iraqis and the Afghans to their own devices, but that is not what Congress via the Kaine resolution is seeking to do. It is merely posturing so that members can pretend they are opposed to actions that they, through their own actions, have otherwise and repeatedly authorized. There will be little more than a show vote if you just go with the Kaine resolution. You're not going to remove forces from Iraq engaged in Shia militia, Sunni militia, or any other militia that are engaged in terrorist activities in Iraq. And I'll leave you with the close here. So keep on pretending. Either way, Soleimani would still be dead, and there's not a word printed by Congress that will change that. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.